We're kind of at the place now in food robotics where companies are building platforms that enable operators to completely reconceptualize what a restaurant could be, whether that's something like a Pizza HQ, using a ghost kitchen model, using a pizza assembly robot to build a kind of reconceptualized new pizza restaurant, or Spice, now owned by Sweetgreen, allowing Sweetgreen to basically rethink what their bowl assembly back of house could look like. And then there's Hyphen, a company which this week announced their $24 million Series A, who makes a fully automated assembly line robot for back of house that essentially lets an operator customize towards whatever their workflow is and integrate humans where it makes sense and automate where it makes sense as well. So I caught up with their founder and CEO, Stephen Klein, this week, a guy who has been around the food robotics space for a while. He was with Cafe X before this. And before that, he was with Instacart. And I really wanted to hear from him what they're planning to do, because I think what Hyphen is building is a really interesting platform for the future of food robotics. And that comes through in our conversation, because what Stephen told me is they want to eventually build what they see as the Shopify food robots, essentially enabling smaller operators, even food influencers at some point, to use their food robotics to basically create a restaurant concept. And I think that's a really interesting feature to talk about and to envision. So you'll hear Steve and I talk about that. You'll hear about the robot and the origin story of how he came to co-found this company. We talk about the idea of building purpose-built robots versus using articulated arms. We talk about ghost kitchens and just where we see this food robotic space going. It's a really fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, if you want to get more podcasts talking about food tech, subscribe to the Spoon podcast in your usual spaces. You can always find it at the Spoon as well. All right, that's it for now. Let's get to my conversation with Stephen Klein. Hey, well, I'm really happy to be here today talking to Stephen Klein, the CEO and co-founder of Hyphen. And Stephen, you guys had some big news this week.
Yeah, we did. Yep, our Series A announcement.
And we'll jump into what that's going to be used and what it's for. But for those of the folks listening who don't know what Hyphen is, I always like to ask people, how do you describe Hyphen to like a complete newbie?
Yeah, I can give you kind of an overview on Hyphen, the product and platform. But maybe to kind of contextualize the conversation, I can give you like a brief, maybe origin story on like myself and Daniel, my co-founder, to kind of contextualize the conversation.
That's always good. And we were just talking beforehand, like how I was wondering if we had met, because you came from Cafe X, one of the kind of the OG food robotics companies. A lot of people know about them making kind of the robotic coffee barista. And then before that, you were Instacart. But let's hear the origin story. When did this idea come up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I am like the food guy at Hyphen. So I've always kind of been obsessed with the food industry. So I actually started my own restaurant in college. So even before Cafe X and Instacart, out doing kind of a text to delivery service for frozen yogurt. And then as you kind of mentioned, I began my career at Instacart and then eventually at Cafe X, where I scaled markets and kind of ran product operations. And I don't know, I've just always found something like super compelling about like building software or products for like that really make ordering and consuming food easier. And I've just always wanted to do that and wanted to do my own thing. So eventually I decided that like the way to actually do that was to build the right foundation from day one and really have a vertically integrated company. And that's actually what led me to finding my co-founder, Daniel Fakupa, our co-founder and CTO. I actually met him when I was at Cafe X. So he was at L2F, the company that actually did the automation for Cafe X. And, just kind of like me, but with robotics, was the co-captain of the robotics team in Palo Alto High, and just has always done a lot of weird things with robots. And he made a great co-founder. We kind of joined forces, and really the origin story of Hyphen starts with Ono Food Co., as you know full well. Really Daniel and I at the onset really wanted to make, really healthy and delicious food is affordable and really, is ubiquitous as fast food. And we were kind of automation maximalists. We designed and built that robotic food truck that you saw in about 15 months with about 5 people. But then COVID hit. So, we finally just got our footing. We moved really quickly. And then where we were operating became like ghost towns overnight. And so we basically kind of just hit the brakes, ceased operations, and kind of made the difficult decision to lay off some staff. And it really sucked, right? The world was like falling back there in March 2020, but we just still loved our team and the product we were building. So we basically pivoted to go from, kind of trying to build a great restaurant to helping, great restaurants survive and really thrive during the pandemic, which kind of leads to Hyphen. And so Hyphen, to answer your question in a long-winded way, it looks and feels just like a make line that you'd see at like a Chipotle or a Subway, yep, or like your local salad shop. So it's that prep table that has those hotel pans lined with ingredients. The only difference with our product is we actually have an automated line underneath the manual, yep, line, and that handles all the digital orders. So delivery, pickup, etc.
So let's step back a little bit. So you were at Cafe X, yeah, and you met Daniel at L2F, and those who are kind of close to the food robotics industry know that they were pretty critical with helping Cafe X. And you guys originally had something you put together before COVID hit, essentially kind of a consumer-facing robotic restaurant.
Exactly. Yeah. So we were kind of automation maximalists. So we did everything. It was fully robotic, and it was on a skid that would actually basically float like a hovercraft on like air pucks, and you'd load the skid into this Mercedes Sprinter truck, if you remember that. And really the idea was, automation helps offset labor. And if we can just be a food truck, we can offset real estate. And that was kind of the original origin story.
So you guys are one of the very first kind of containerized or kind of mobile robotic restaurants, and you guys are operating in the Bay Area. Is that correct?
Actually in LA County.
LA County. Okay.
Which is, I'm proud of, because that's a very difficult Department of Health to get approved. And so, yeah, we're the first robotic food truck, as far as I know.
And you guys were cruising along, literally and figuratively, and then COVID hit, and you laid people off. And so you kind of looked at each other and said, "Hey, we should productize this." Like, had you had those thoughts before COVID hit, or you had the harsh reality of the layoffs, and then you kind of really decided to pivot and thought of it then?
Yeah, great question. So we had always thought that we were going to go into bowls and other meal categories. Kind of our thesis, and it still is today, is that, we want our feeders to have a wide enough process window to be able to kind of deal with any material properties as it relates to food. But starting with smoothies, it's easier from a regulation perspective as well as an automation perspective, because you don't have to worry about, damaging the food, right? It's blended at the end of the day. But we wanted to kind of be like Yum Brands 2.0 with automation and healthy food.
And it's so interesting that so many of the companies that start in kind of consumer facing robotics, well, not so many, but some, like Eatsa, for example, actually kind of pivoted towards just being a technology player. They had some other issues and just went kind of towards the software side. But, when I was thinking of you guys and kind of what you guys have built with this fully automated make line, they had a similar thing for back of house that they had filed some patents for. So, but you guys do seem unique, and then you have this full end-to-end modularized assembly make line. And so let's kind of walk through what you have, because I was reading through the components of it. You have so many pieces of the puzzle that people can add to their make line.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lego blocks, right? So you can kind of actually swap out the modules and kind of connect them as like a, choose your own adventure for this food service world. But a lot of the actual system architecture that was on the smoothie truck is actually in the make line. The feeding systems are the exact same. So we did leverage that. And yeah, I think it's just like an exercise in hubris to try to be, both the technology platform and the brand. That's probably why you saw, Eatsa and us kind of move away. It's much better to be the, kind of the picks and shovels, kind of building the tools for the restaurant.
That's interesting that so much came over from the food truck. So talk about that. You made this transition towards being kind of a platform provider. You had actually had your own systems operating in practice, consumer facing, but you did, I would imagine, create some new modules. So talk about kind of how you developed further and built upon it.
Yeah. So we leveraged some of that system architecture, but really, we actually pre-sold a lot of our systems to our customers today before we built anything. So we had this unique opportunity to kind of co-develop our platform and our product with our customers. And that shows up in very subtle ways, right? Like for one, it looks like kitchen equipment, like it belongs in the kitchen, which just makes kind of getting up to speed and training a lot easier. It feels kind of familiar. And then, the dual line, which you can kind of get into, but the modules, I think was your question. We have, the leafy green modules, and then, the portion cup module to kind of, dispense and fulfill, dressings and bowls and stuff like that. That's some of the new technology. And
that's interesting that you got people to kind of say what they wanted, and then you developed around some of those early conversations. It's a lot of times startups want to, or a lot of times customers want to see what you built, make sure it's working. Was the fact that you guys had an operational consumer facing restaurant why they took a leap of faith with you guys?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was just that credibility, right? We had built something before together. And then, the team, right? Like Daniel has a lot of experience doing, and, industrial automation for food processing too, like Taylor Farms and Blommer Chocolate. And then we actually, I think, this, we poached the head of automation from Sweetgreen, Derek Peets, who was
Yep,
actually
yep.
Danny's former boss at L2F. So we had a lot of credibility within the industry. And then we had kind of like a proof point. And that's kind of what got them over the edge.
And that's so interesting, because you think about this industry, and I don't want to talk too much about your competition, but, Sweetgreen by Spice. So the other one I was thinking of when I think of kind of a pretty automated, almost fully automated back of house bowl creation robot is the Spice robot, which Sweetgreen created. So like you kind of have the three big players. That's really interesting because it's a small industry, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally is. And Spice is a great team too. They really have the right approach like we do with purpose-built automation. I think, a lot of robotics in food service use articulated arms like robotic arms. And that makes a lot of sense, right? It's kind of like the white knight solution. It's easy to program and get up and running, but it's very inefficient for kind of like, repetitive tasks like assembling food. And so, Spice has the right approach. It's to kind of build these modules that, are seemingly kind of agnostic to the ingredient type, but still kind of fit into the real estate of a restaurant.
Yeah. I think the purpose-built design kind of shows a move and nod towards efficiency. It does seem like it's easier to get articulating arms up and running. And a lot of the kind of first generation food robotic companies had those articulating arms. But, you guys, you see Picnic kind of building purpose built some of those. So it does seem like that makes for more efficiency. Talk about kind of the make line where you have kind of this bottom and you top, like, when I look at what it is, like you can actually have kind of robotic assembly below, or you can have the human who's working on top of the robot actually kind of use it. Talk about how those two pieces interplay.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of meant by it shows up in subtle ways. Our product it's like, for one, it feels like a make line. Two, it doesn't take up any real estate, right? Because it's dual sided. So you got the top line, which is still used for kind of in-house orders, mom and dad ordering for the first time. It's nice to have somebody there, that's very much a part of our customer's brand. But if you're ordering for like your mobile device, like you don't really care who's making your food as long as it's, fresh, fast, and consistent. And so we handle all of that. And then we can literally just take our make line, swap it with an existing make line, and take up 0 square footage and increase the throughput by, orders of magnitude without taking up any of that space. It's also nice too, because it's a fail safe. A lot of people say robots don't take sick breaks. Like that is not true. It's called downtime. Robots do go down. Even with 99% uptime, it's still that 1% really hurts. And so our dual-sided line is kind of like an escalator. If an escalator goes down, it becomes stairs. Like it's less efficient than an escalator, but it's still doing the job that it's intended to do. With us, if our system was to go down, you still have that manual production line, right? There's still that fail-safe there. It's less efficient, but it's at parity with what you had the day before.
That's interesting. So you have built-in redundancy.
Yeah.
Also probably lets the operator kind of design and customize around their flows and maybe integrate robotics where they feel it's like it works for them, and then kind of let the human handle the other parts. Makes a lot of sense. You guys talk a lot about, or you write a lot about in your kitchen operating system. And so, I do think a lot about how we have all these different kind of software components kind of touching the cooking in the kitchens nowadays, point of sale, et cetera. So talk about that. You do have like a kind of as a side related note, you do have Steve Fredette, who's the president of Toast, obviously one of the biggest point of sale operators out there as an investor. Talk about how you guys integrate with other pieces of software. Is it going to ultimately become a true kitchen OS? Yeah,
it's a great question. And the short answer is yes. And the longer answer is it is, because it's an enabling technology, right? There's a lot of great venture-backed startups in the food service world that are software. But because they're not tied to the core production, that make line, really where the food happens, the bill of materials or the recipe gets assembled, these types of things, they have no data, right? And so they're streamlining workflows, and they're maybe providing like directionally accurate, metrics and insights. But because we are capturing that data, the make line is fully instrumented. We can actually start to use that data in really interesting ways, right? And so the kind of the most obvious example is the one that you see on the make line, which is that backsplash display. It's kind of like a fuel gauge on your car, but instead of like how many miles until you're out of gas. It's like how many meals until you're out of like cherry tomatoes. And that helps because the runner or the person on the line knows, when hotel pans are running out. And then the prep chef that's, actually prepping the food, like a Chipotle, for instance, like they're usually like yelling over, like need more black beans or need more chicken. Like for us, because we have that data on the line, we can nudge the prep cook and let them know what food to prep next as well as how much. And so you start to kind of augment labor with our software solutions.
Yeah, I think this idea of like using software as an augmentative tool to help worker productivity is like a kind of a lot of pretty overlooked thing. And as you have it fairly highly tied to kind of the hardware systems, it seems like you could really make workers more productive.
Yeah, exactly. And like we really do think about like, designing, our technology and platform for people, not instead of them. And so a lot of what we do is like it's centered around making that person more efficient depending upon their job within the kitchen or restaurant.
And even though we do talk about like working and building people in, it's funny. I remember talking to Buck Jordan when they introduced the NAMI. They do want to ultimately do like a fully robotic end-to-end, try to get there where you can like make the food, assemble it, get it prepped, and hand it off to like a robotic delivery vehicle. So you guys with your funding have you wrote about how you're going to build out new products. Do you see kind of adding automation on both sides of the kind of production and then ultimately kind of towards the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly things we can do there. I think there's just a lot we can do with just, the software itself. Yeah. Like prepping food, at least for our customers, is very difficult to do because it's fresh. It's very hard to automate that. It's quite easy to, automate the prep or production of, burgers or pizza. It's quite difficult to do that for like fresh ingredients. So
you guys, would you say you're doing a lot of assembly and kind of build final meal prep and production? In terms of doing that prepping of ingredients, you guys aren't necessarily chopping the lettuce and cutting the tomatoes though. So you see that as an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that could be an opportunity, but it's not one that we're looking at today. Like I said, okay. Like there's like, because we have the core food data, we're kind of like the system of record for food and labor data because of our make line. We don't need all the hardware. We can leverage that data and use software to make those folks more efficient in the back of house. Just because, like I said, like the upfront investment for doing, food prep automation for us, at least, for our customers is quite difficult and not a problem that we're currently looking at tackling.
You announced that you have up to like almost 2 years worth of orders, I think, in your announcement. You said like, I think so you have like kind of a lot of pre-sales. Can you talk about any of your kind of customers and kind of who, or characterize who's kind of buying from you at this point?
I can't mention our customers. We have NDAs and stuff in place, but we have 11 of them. And so I can kind of talk about them at a high level. And so, we have a lot of, probably no surprise, salad and bowl chain restaurants, kind of across the US from, really San Francisco to LA to New York City. We also have, a co-packer that does anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 salads a day for like a very large grocer. And so they're using our system because it's the same problem, like flexing up and down to meet that peak demand or, unpredictable demand is very difficult to do. And then we actually have a very large corporate caterer for like, college and corporate catering that we're going to be launching our system with.
That makes a lot of sense. So food service markets, food retail, or at least kind of a provider to food retail, and then like a lot of restaurants. Talk about like moving kind of beyond bowl food. You sound like it's pretty flexible and you ultimately want to kind of have all sorts of food. Is that part of like the new product development?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why we're more focused on that side of the business as opposed to prep. So like really our core IP is around our feeders and kind of having a wide enough process window to automate and properly dispense and plate ingredients, right? And most automation startups, they actually pre-dice or create or prep their food for automation. But a chef, that's blasphemous. Like the plating and presentation needs to be perfect. That's why we do like the radial patternings and stuff. But because we have such such a wide process window. Dispensing anything in a bowl or plate is not too dissimilar from dispensing something on a tortilla or in a taco shell, or even on a bread, for instance, right? It's all kind of the same task. And then all you're really changing when you go into from bowls to burritos is you're changing that processing module. So you're going from lidding and labeling a bowl to wrapping and rolling a burrito. But you don't even really need to do that to get a lot of gains on just like the food production side. You could just probably fill the tortilla and somebody can kind of wrap it at the end of the line.
It's so interesting that you talk about, some national chains on the kind of obviously the bowl and salad side. You're going to move towards other things like burritos. Are we kind of looking towards the future where you're almost going to have to, if you have a national chain to compete, build in robotics like you guys are making into your back of house? 5 years, 10 years down the line, will we see most national chains, you think, integrating this?
Yeah. And I think maybe not in the way that somebody would think, though. I think for us, at least, we really care about local and regional brands.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of think about ourselves like Shopify in a lot of ways, but instead of enabling really, merchants to compete with the likes of Amazon, we're enabling, restaurants to compete with the likes of a DoorDash, right? A lot of these companies are kind of sucking up the restaurant data and then building their Amazon basics of that brand or of that food. And we think the world is just a much more interesting place with more local and regional brands. And so once we have our kind of infrastructure built out, kind of like AWS with cloud, right? We can actually start renting out capacity from our make lines, and you can see kind of an emergence of, local and regional brands, or, culinary students starting their restaurant, from their dorm room, or, a number of other kind of ways, or food influencers, right? That's a big thing on TikTok and Instagram, creating their own brand. Because we're basically removing that overhead of, starting and scaling a restaurant. You can kind of just, basically do it from your home effectively. And that's just a really cool place in our mind. That's really cool world.
Interesting. The Shopify for food robotics and restaurants. That's really interesting. I mean, I've written a lot about how we're seeing the merger of it's a natural kind of peanut butter and chocolate combination, food robotics and ghost kitchens. So I would imagine you probably have some conversations with some of the existing ghost kitchen providers, or there might be an entirely new start that builds around a product like yours.
Exactly. There's we are working with a few virtual brands. I forgot to mention that, but there are people already kind of starting to think that way.
Yeah. I think Pizza HQ is a company out of New York that is kind of completely reconceiving that idea of what a pizza chain could be, using Picnic, one of your, I don't know if it's a competitor because they do pizza, but I can imagine there could be a Pizza HQ using something like Hyphen and kind of reconceptualizing what a restaurant looks like.
Yeah, or a suite of restaurants, right? If you could do different kind of categories or brands of bowls or salads, and eventually burritos, and you kind of run your Yum brands kind of 2.0, from one location.
Well, Stephen Klein, this is certainly exciting. It's a busy week for you. You guys announced your $24 million Series A. So I know that you're busy building a company. I appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us here at the Spoon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
So are you a food influencer, a culinary student, a creator that wants to eventually create your own restaurant or a virtual restaurant using robotics? You may be able to do that someday by renting capacity on a Hyphen. It's a pretty interesting feature to think about, isn't it? I expect we'll be hearing a lot more from Hyphen. The fact that they've gotten so much early traction is a good sign. I think it's also a testament to the fact that they have some legitimacy. They've worked in food robotics before. They had an operating robot. And so I just think there was a comfort level, it sounds like, with some operators and engaging with them fairly early on. And the fact that they did this engagement and helped them build the robot using that sort of input, I think was also a really interesting part of the story as well. So we'll keep on top of Hyphen as well as other food robotics stories, as well as all food tech. So make sure you tune in to The Spoon. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. We'll talk to you all soon.